Most of the great protected places in the world were saved because someone stood in a room full of maps and argued. This one was saved because a woman looked out of her kitchen window in the 1960s, watched the farms around her being surveyed into lots, and quietly began buying them. She was not a politician or a scientist. She simply decided that the children of this town would need a piece of countryside more than they needed another cul-de-sac. We are walking through the result. This is Dodge Nature Center in West St. Paul in Dakota County, Minnesota, on the bluff south of the Mississippi River. The city name is a puzzle in itself. West St. Paul sits south of downtown St. Paul, not west of it, because the name was inherited from an earlier settlement on the river's west bank that went bankrupt in 1862. The current city was carved out and incorporated in 1889, and it kept the old name anyway. The land here folds. Grassland runs up to a woodland edge. The woodland drops into a hollow, and at the bottom of the hollow there is water. 460 acres are held across 4 properties now, in West St. Paul, in Mendota Heights, and out in Cottage Grove. The piece under our feet is the main property, about 110 acres of prairie, pond, and oak wood, with something like 8 miles of trail threaded through the whole preserve. To understand why the ground rolls the way it does, you have to go a very long way down. Beneath this grass, a few tens of meters below the roots, lies rock that formed on the floor of a shallow tropical sea roughly 450 million years ago in the Ordovician period. Minnesota was near the equator then, warm and drowned. Lime mud settled, shells piled up, sand drifted along the seabed, and all of it hardened. Those layers are still there, and geologists know them by name. Near the top sits the Platteville limestone, a hard gray lid. Under it lies a thin band of shale, and under that the St. Peter sandstone, a pale, almost sugary sand you can crumble with a thumbnail. Deeper still is the Prairie Duchenne dolomite, hard rock stacked on soft rock. That single arrangement, a lid over a pillow, would one day carve the entire river valley we live beside. Then came the ice. During the last glaciation, lobes of the Laurentide ice sheet pushed down into what is now Minnesota. This corner of the state was worked over by the Des Moines lobe and its offshoot, the Grantsburg sublobe, which swung east and overrode older glacial ground, mixing its sediment with the earlier deposits of the superior lobe. The gentle swells and hollows we are walking across are not hills in the usual sense. They are what the ice left behind when it quit. North and west of here, the melting ice sheet dammed an enormous lake. Lake Agassiz covered well over 100,000 square miles, and in places was hundreds of feet deep. Between roughly 13,000 and 11,000 years ago, it found an outlet to the south, and the water came through. That flood is called Glacial River Warren, and it cut a valley up to 5 miles wide and 250 feet deep on its way toward this exact spot. Where River Warren met the Mississippi, it plunged over a great waterfall. Because the hard limestone lid sat on soft sandstone, the falling water hollowed out the sand and the limestone collapsed over and over, so the falls walked slowly upstream. One arm of that retreat went up the Mississippi and became St. Anthony Falls, which is still traveling. The trench it left is the Mississippi Gorge, the only true gorge on the entire length of the river. It lies just north of us. The land the ice uncovered did not become forest straight away, and much of it never did. Before European settlement, this part of Dakota County was a mosaic. Prairie ran up against open oak savanna, and dense hardwood forest, which the surveyors called the Big Woods, survived only where fire could not easily reach, in steep ravines and behind water. Fire was the editor. Bur oak, with its thick corky bark, was one of the few trees that could take the burning and keep standing. That old mosaic is exactly what the preserve is trying to hold on to. Step out of the trees and the grass is suddenly over your head. Step back in and the light drops. This is not decoration. It is a working reconstruction of what stood here before the plow, kept honest by mowing, by seeding, and by prescribed burning, because a prairie left alone in Minnesota does not stay a prairie. Left alone, it quietly turns into brush and then into woods. A few miles from this trail, two great rivers come together. The Minnesota joins the Mississippi below the bluffs, and in the Dakota language that meeting place is Beedot, meaning the place where two waters come together. To many Dakota people, this is not simply a confluence. It is the center, the place of origin, where the first Dakota people came into being. Rivers and people have been meeting at Beedot for something on the order of 10,000 years. So the ground under this preserve is Dakota homeland, and it is worth saying plainly that the Dakota are not a chapter that closed. They are here now, in this county and this state, with their own communities and governments, including the Mendota-Mdewakanton Dakota community just up the road. The word Minnesota itself comes from the Dakota, from Mni Soda Makos, the land where the waters reflect the clouds. The name of the state is a Dakota description of the light on the water. Look northwest from these bluffs, and the ground rises to a hill in Mendota Heights that Dakota people call Oheyawahe, a sacred place much visited, a place where people go for burials. Settlers called it Pilot Knob because riverboat pilots steered by it. It is a gathering place and a burial ground of great age and great meaning. After a long campaign by Dakota people and their allies to protect it from development, Oheyawahe was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2017. There was a village very close to here. Kaposia was the Mdewakanton Dakota settlement led by a line of leaders the French called Petit Corbeau and the Americans called Little Crow. The name Kaposia is usually translated as light or traveling light, not encumbered with baggage. After flooding in the 1820s, the village shifted to the west bank of the Mississippi, a few miles below Fort Snelling, and in 1840, one of those leaders was living on ground that is now West St. Paul. That world moved with the seasons rather than against them. Maple sap in spring, fish in gardens through the summer, wild rice and hunting in the autumn, winter camps in sheltered river bottoms. The land we are crossing was not empty and it was not wilderness. It was a managed, inhabited, well-understood landscape, burned deliberately, harvested carefully, and traveled by water more often than by road. The prairie itself was partly a human creation, kept open with fire for centuries. Then, in the 1820s, the United States Army built a stone fort on the bluff directly above Bedo. Fort Snelling was meant to plant American authority at the meeting of the two rivers, to control the fur trade, and to watch the frontier. It did all of that, and it did something else as well. It became the anchor around which traders, missionaries, land speculators, and settlers gathered, and the pressure on Dakota land began to build from that day forward. On the 5th of August, 1851, near the foot of Pilot Knob, and within sight of the fort, the Treaty of Mendota was signed. The Mdewakanton and Wapakute bands gave up their claim to a vast stretch of southern Minnesota. Together with a companion treaty signed weeks earlier upriver, it transferred something in the order of 25 million acres. In exchange, the bands were promised money, a little over $1.4 million, and a reservation along the Minnesota River. The promised payments were slow, short, and swallowed by traders' claims. Within a decade, the Dakota were confined, hungry, and desperate, and in 1862 the war came. What followed was mass execution, imprisonment, and forced exile, and it emptied this landscape of the people who had made it. That is the honest hinge of the story. Every quiet field in this county, including the one we are standing in, sits on the far side of that dispossession, and it is not a small thing to walk here. With the treaties signed, the land rush arrived by water. Steamboats worked their way up the Mississippi to the landing that became St. Paul, and the town exploded. Speculators laid out paper cities on the bluffs, and one of those paper cities, the first West St. Paul, was incorporated in 1858. It lasted 4 years. Spring floods and debt broke it in 1862, and it collapsed back into township land, taking its investors down with it. What survived the boom was farming. The prairie sod, matted with roots several feet deep, gave way to steel plows. Oak groves were cut for fuel and fence rail and building timber. Wetlands were drained. Within a generation, the mosaic of prairie, savanna, and big woods that had taken thousands of years to assemble was cut into a grid of fields and section lines. What we now call a preserve is, in truth, a small rescued fragment of something that was almost entirely erased. For most of a century, this ridge above the river was quiet farm country. Dairy cattle, hay, small orchards, market gardens supplying the growing cities across the water. The town of West St. Paul, as we know it, was finally carved out and incorporated in 1889, and for decades it stayed a place of barns and fields with a streetcar suburb creeping toward it. If you had walked this trail in 1930, you would have been walking somebody's pasture. Then came the years after the Second World War and the American suburb. Dakota County was directly in the path. Highways were widened, sewer lines pushed south, and farm after farm was sold, surveyed and turned into blocks of new houses. It was not villainy, it was arithmetic. A farmer facing retirement with land suddenly worth many times its agricultural value has one obvious move, and thousands of them made it. The countryside around St. Paul disappeared field by field. Which brings us to 1964 and to Olivia Irvin Dodge. She and her husband Arthur moved out to West St. Paul that year into an old country house on the slope, built in 1909 with about 37 acres around it. And she watched what was happening to the neighboring land. In the mid-1960s, with development closing in, she made a decision that would change this corner of Minnesota permanently. She started buying the farms. Olivia Irvin Dodge was born in 1918, a daughter of Horace Hills Irvin, a St. Paul lumber businessman. She grew up in a large house on Summit Avenue, the grand street of the city. She had money, and she had a very clear idea of what money was for. Her instinct, again and again across her long life, was to take something private and expensive and hand it to the public permanently, and then go and find the next thing. The clearest example came first. On the 31st of August, 1965, Olivia and her sister Clotilda Irvin Moles gave the family home at 1006 Summit Avenue to the people of Minnesota in memory of their parents. The Irvins had lived there since 1912. Until that gift, the state had no official residence for its governor at all. That house has been the Minnesota governor's residence ever since, and it began as a donation from two sisters. The next year, 1966, she began buying land here in earnest. Parcels along Wentworth Avenue first, then more across Marie Avenue, farm by farm, as they came up for sale. She was not assembling an estate. She was assembling a place that would never be sold again. In 1967, she put the land into a nonprofit and gave it a name, and the name was not hers. She called it the Thomas Irvin Dodge Nature Center after her son. Her reasoning was simple, and she repeated it for the rest of her life. A nature center, she said, seemed and still does the wisest way to use the land. Save it, respect it, and use it to teach children. She was blunt about why it mattered. Children, she pointed out, are the voters of tomorrow, and people who have never known a field will not vote to protect one. And she had no patience for people who claimed they were powerless. Too many people think, "What can I do?" she said. "All of us can do something." It is a plain sentence, and it sits behind everything on this property. When Dodge opened in 1967, it was one of the very first nature centers in Minnesota, at a moment when the idea of a nature center barely existed in America. She was not following a movement. She was, in this state, more or less starting one. And and she made one choice that still sets this place apart. She kept the farm. Most nature preserves erase agriculture and pretend it never happened. Dodge did the opposite. Cattle, sheep, goats, and chickens still live here, in pastures and pens that schoolchildren walk straight past on their way into the woods. There are community gardens, an orchard, a bee apiary, and in March, when the sap runs, the maples on this property are still tapped for syrup. That combination, real animals, real crops, real woodland, all inside a first-ring suburb, is the reason this small preserve carries such weight. Tens of thousands of visitors come through in a year, most of them children, supported by a very small staff and well over 1,000 volunteers. In September of the year 2000, Dodge opened a nature preschool, the first of its kind in Minnesota, 3 classrooms built for children who would spend their days outdoors. Walk the open ground at the end of August, and it is at its loudest. Big bluestem stands over head height and turns purple at the tips. Goldenrod and asters carry the last nectar of the year. Monarch butterflies are staging here, fattening on milkweed and late blooms before a flight to central Mexico that will take 4 generations to complete in reverse. The grass is full of movement, and almost none of it is visible from the trail. White-tailed deer bed in the woodland edges. Red foxes work the field margins at dusk. Hawks ride the thermals coming off the bluffs, and the preserve keeps raptor enclosures on site, home to birds too injured to be released, which spend their lives instead teaching children what a talon actually is. Nothing about this place is a wilderness. It is a small, hard-working, closely tended piece of ground, and it is absolutely alive. Then there is the water. In the low ground the trail passes ponds ringed with cattail, and in the warm months these are the noisiest places on the property. Red-winged blackbirds hold territory from the reed tops. Frogs call and fall silent as you approach. Herons stand and wait. Dragonflies work the surface. A pond is where a child first learns that a jar of murky water is not empty, and that discovery is the whole point of this place. Olivia Irvin Dodge died in 2009, aged 90. She had by then also founded a second nature center in Maryland in 1975 and given away one of the country's largest private collections of Franklin Roosevelt material. In 2017, on the 50th anniversary of this place, the center opened a library and history center in her name. But her real monument is the ground, and the ground is not for sale. So this is what it means to save a piece of country. Not a national park, not a wilderness, not a landscape of famous scale. 110 acres on a suburban ridge, a barn, some ponds, an oak wood, and 8 miles of path, free to walk from sunrise to sunset forever, because one person in 1966 looked at a for sale sign and refused to accept the obvious ending. And it holds all of it at once. An Ordovician Sea, the bed of a glacier, the valley of a flood that drained an inland lake, the prairie the Dakota tended with fire, and the homeland they were forced from within sight of these bluffs. A century of farms, a wave of subdivisions that stopped at this fence line, all of it stacked under one field of late summer grass in a town most people drive straight through. That is the strange gift of a small preserve. It teaches you that the big story is not somewhere else. It is under your feet, in the nearest patch of grass anyone bothered to save, and someone had to bother. Olivia Dodge bothered. Go and find the piece of ground near you that is still undecided and walk it and learn its name. Thank you for watching. Follow for more trails of the world.